Let's get started. Maybe start off with some intros. Maybe we can go in order, starting off with Jelena.
Hi, I'm Jelena Hoffert. I work at MasterCard, focused on identity value chain expansion.
Hi, my name is AJ Amlani. I'm the CEO of Aware, a company in Boston that's been publicly traded since 1996, focused on biometric technology, that's face matching, fingerprint, iris, and voice.
Hi, I'm Priya. I'm the founder CEO of Cobalt ID. We specialize in business fraud network detection. So think fraud rings, shell company schemes, all now accelerated by AI.
Hi, I'm Nate. I'm the head of global reusable identity and agentic identity over at Prove. I joined them at the beginning of this year after they acquired my company Portable, which played in the reusable identity space.
Awesome. So I think let's start off with a baseline of how should we think about digital identity? How has it shifted over the last couple of decades? And then maybe we can get into some of the AI stuff. Nate, I know we were talking earlier, you have a great framework for how to think about some of this.
Yeah, so for folks out in the audience, what Prove does is we are able to verify 2.5 billion adults globally through mobile devices. That includes different types of cryptographic keys, PII, and additional payment information that might be identity linked. So the way we think about this at Prove, and I think it might be a good kind of baseline for our discussion here, is that there's really 5 parts to identity, some of which are payments agnostic and some of which directly impact payments and the ability to facilitate commerce. So there's authentication. Is this person real? Is this agent real? Is this requesting party or merchant real? Just are they legit? First base. Second is authorization. What am I allowed to do with this data? Or what is the relying party or the requester allowed to do with this data? It could be fill out a form for me. It could be, complete this purchase for me if I've added like a billing address and a card or PAN, something like that. The third is kind of pure play identity. What attributes of mine am I supplying for this interaction and for what purpose? Do I need to show DOB or is, over 18 sufficient? Does it need my state or does it need my whole shipping address? Something like that. The fourth thing is payments orchestration. So does this payment method match to this person? Is this person an authorized holder of this payment method, and how do we prove that? And then the fifth thing is structuring disputes and everything after consummation of an interaction or transaction. So what does the, say, audit log look like? What does the kind of record keeping system look like? And is there sufficient, you could call it data exhaust, in order to process a dispute or a claim? And how do we prove that these actors took part in this interaction in case someone disputes it after the fact? So those are the 5 things. They apply in the human world. And I think what we'll probably touch on imminently is, do these still hold in the agentic world? What still works and what's super broken?
Yeah, I mean, great segue. So yeah, that's exactly what I'd love to dive into next. There's an obvious seismic shift happening with generative AI and how identity, everything from document verification to sharing credentials and information with agents. How is this sort of manifesting in the identity and fraud space? Maybe Julian, if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say to my team that we are very lucky because we have unlimited job security, which is to say that cybersecurity, identity, and fraud is getting harder than ever to really understand. It's very hard today already to understand if you're working with or on the other side of the transaction is a real human, let alone an agent, but it's more important than ever before. I think there's 3 really big seismic shifts happening that we're tracking. The first is real-time payments. The second is the emergence of deepfakes. And the third, of course, as we'll talk about a lot, the emergence of AI agents. And so taking these in turn, it's no secret that consumers want to transact and get their money in real time. There's a movement towards real-time payments, whether that's the emergence of Pix real-time payment rails in Brazil. It is in the US, we have Zelle, we have Cash App, we have PayPal, all of those to try to mimic the real-time payment. The really big problem is that while we can kind of move money in real time, or we have the infrastructure to do so, we do not have the infrastructure to verify consumers, let alone agents in real time, especially cross-border, especially with super low latency that's needed in order to really understand that transaction. But we have to move to that direction if we want to protect our payments ecosystem, which is of course really important for us at MasterCard. The second thing that we're tracking is the emergence of deepfake technology. So we're probably well aware in this room, but it's seriously like we're living in a Black Mirror episode. The deepfake videos, pictures, audio is truly so hyper realistic that us with our human eyes basically can't tell if it's a deep fake or real. So thank God I'm one, not a celebrity, or two in law, because I don't know how those things will emerge, but it also impacts the identity and fraud industry. If you're logging into your brokerage account, if you're logging into your Coinbase account, and Coinbase or Schwab doesn't know it's you, they used to step up to taking a selfie and matching that with a picture of your ID or passport. Now imagine in 2 seconds, I can create a hyper-realistic selfie that's deepfaked and picture of my passport. So that's pretty much a broken process at this point, unless we innovate really quickly. And the third thing, and this is something that we're spending a lot of time on at MasterCard, is we've already announced Agent Pay, and that's our agentic commerce solution. People can already pay with agents today. You can already do that. The next framework that we're thinking of is what happens when people create an account through an agent, log in through an agent, make a payment, dispute a charge. Agents will handle all of our interactions. And so we have to go from a world where we're not only understanding who the human is on the other side, but if it's a genuine human, if the human has really given the authorization to a bot to handle that transaction, and making sure the bot's not co-opted. So we're in a very interesting time where we have a lot of our previous fraud technology that needs to be revised for this new world. And we're kind of flying without a plane right now. That we already have enabled bots to do this, and we don't have the coordinating infrastructure. We've already enabled payments to be real time. We don't have the infrastructure. So it's exciting to see the startups and the companies on this stage who are really building towards that new world.
Yeah, and then one thing I'd add to this is, when you think about the ways in which AI is enabling fraud, I think one angle of it relates to the ways in which it's enabling all of these attacks that Jelena was just talking about. But there's also another element to it in terms of the way it's all completely shifted the economics of committing fraud. Now, a lot of the way we think about this internally is there is a cost for each of these fraudsters to engage in these fraud attacks, meaning every single action they need to take comes with time, effort, or monetary cost. In the same way that all of us have had many of our workflows become a lot more efficient, it's funny to say, but the ROI or the return on investment for any of these fraudsters to commit these attacks is also fundamentally shifted. And so much of what we've seen is just the proliferation of these attacks at scale because it's fundamentally faster and cheaper for them to get away with. As an example here, they're like, we all love ChatGPT, but there are off-the-shelf LLMs literally called Fraud GPT that are also purpose-built for getting away with some of these attacks. And so that's been a really interesting shift to kind of witness as well.
Yeah, I think we all talk about the cool innovation and all the interesting stuff we can do with AI, but then like the flip side of it is it's all really open source, and you can kind of take a lot of the code and do whatever you want with it. And that it seems like some people started their own Fraud GPT. I think you mentioned some other stuff too. I think that's a great segue into the next question too, which is, what are some of the vulnerabilities that you guys are most worried about? Maybe Ajay, if you want to start off here. I think like this, obviously, Jelena went through a bunch of different workflows and different ways that fraud can actually happen. What are some of the scariest ones that you guys are seeing right now?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, I want to come back to the original point as well, and then I'll kind of go into some of the scariest attacks as well. Identity actually lives in carbon-based life forms like ourselves. So everything other than that, you're kind of making a guess in terms of who it is. So the question is like, how much proof, what is your % probability that the person is who they say they are? If you go back millennia, like we were all cave people, right? So like you kind of knew who, some of whom in this audience, like my friend Shep over here, is still a cave person. But you look at the way that now we transferred between different villages and different cave people, and now you needed to have some kind of a derived credential. So you needed to go through a vetting process to get that derived credential, like an ID, a driver's license in today's day and age. And then now you move into a digital world. And so identity living in the carbon-based life form, you would think would be very transferable. Why go to a physical credential and then go to a digital ID? Why not just go from a carbon-based life form directly to a digital enablement? Unfortunately, there's been kind of the same effect that happened around Terminator and the fear that we all lived with AI. If we actually invested in AI, all of a sudden robots are going to exterminate humans. The same thing happened with Minority Report in 2002. So I was terrified after watching Minority Report of biometrics, because Minority Report for me scared me about biometrics, because we're all going to go down a surveillance society and we'd have to replace our eyeballs through, robotic spiders. The reality of the situation is biometrics can most effectively protect people in a digital age, in a digital format, especially with forward-facing cameras and all the signals. In addition, from the mobile devices that you have, some of the past patterns and behaviors that you can use. But the attacks now that are happening at scale, the creation, as Elena said, about deepfakes and the creation of the ability to be able to try to trick biometric systems, require you to have very high-end liveness tools. What liveness tools are you think about it as like a CAPTCHA on steroids. You need to have better capabilities of being able to assess whether or not it's a live human that you're dealing with or a bot. And if you're dealing with a bot, does that bot have the right delegated authority from the live carbon-based life form? So it still comes down to assessing whether or not you have a carbon-based life form at the other end to be able to defend against the highly sophisticated attacks that are occurring by state-sponsored actors today. I mean, these are biometrics are being used now to really protect the highest end use cases, things like filing taxes on irs.gov, accessing military systems, other things like that. We have the highest end attackers coming into these, and we need to be able to stay not one step ahead, but 2 steps ahead. We need to see what kind of attacks they're conducting and whether or not they're actually getting close to be able to protect or break these systems so that we can continue to modernize. This is, to Elena's point, like, we are actually in a really future-proofed world because we're constantly going to have job security. The bad actors are constantly going to get better. They're collaborating better and having better tools. And we need to stay 2 steps ahead, not 1.
You make a great point about the state sponsorship. And I think, when we think of fraudsters, I think we immediately think of the stereotypical, like, someone who lives in a basement and is just hacking away on their computer. But these are really sophisticated, organizations, right? These are basically full-on companies that are designed to just break, American financial systems and stuff like that. Anyone wants to talk about that? I'm kind of curious to get some thoughts about some of that stuff too.
One of the things that I had no idea about until a couple weeks ago, I was with an amazing organization called GASA, which is the Global Anti-Scam Alliance. And they mentioned that in certain emerging markets, there's actually schools to learn how to conduct fraud. And it's not frowned upon in the way that we maybe would think so with a US-centric perspective, because the outcome for you, if you learn and you go to fraud school, is that you make a lot more money than your other kind of job and career prospects. So again, these are real money-making organizations. There is massive global coordination through things like WhatsApp, Telegram, and this is how they make money. And that's, I think, directly contradicts sort of this framework that it's these loners in the basement. It's big criminal enterprises.
I think just growing on that briefly, I'm sort of reminded of the old New Yorker cartoon that no one on the internet knows you're a dog or something like that. I'm probably misphrasing it. The problem goes 2 ways inside things like LLMs and these kind of chat-based surfaces, where absent, other advancements in technology that a lot of other companies are working on, the person needs to verify themselves, which is kind of normal to our everyday life. But we're starting to see a pattern where payment services providers, other types of networks, merchant platforms need to start creating sorts of trust registries or consistent ways of the merchant or the business on the other end of verifying themselves and being able to express that verification to the person. The reason why this happens is that, I'm no longer going to Crate and Barrel to buy a chair anymore. I might be going to one of the chat products. I'm looking for things, I'm discovering things. In turn, that merchant has its own agent operating inside the chat, and I have my own agent operating inside the chat. So you now have 2 digital middlemen between me, a natural person, a carbon-based life form, and Crate and Barrel. This gets really complicated because you have 2 problems that are basically brand new, but not brand new, I'll say, vectors for fraudsters. One, exploiting this sort of on behalf problem. How can I know that the agent that I've spun up to go buy me a chair can correctly demonstrate that it's acting on my behalf within specific parameters. The second problem is merchant verification, or the flip side is merchant impersonation. How can I be sure that the carousel of chairs or the checkout screen I might see embedded in a chat be really populated by the merchant of record that I want it to be, and not a state actor, a singular bad guy, some professional network of business counterfeiters. So really what we're moving towards is both sides always need to authenticate to each other and kind of create this protected channel, if you will. Otherwise, both sides are vulnerable to exactly the kinds of things that Jelena was just talking about.
Yeah, I'd say that's a really great point. And if you think about transactions today, we are still living in a world where every transaction digitally is an AI transaction. If you're in except for, physical ones in a farmer's market aren't, but every online transaction that you have some agent taking your credit card, putting stuff in a basket, processing your order. You have an agent on the other end accepting that order, conducting your delivery. So right now we're living in a world of agentic commerce. It's just, these are dumb agents, the stupidest agents. They're getting smarter and smarter, and we want them to get smarter and smarter. I actually would love to not have to do my expenses anymore, right? And all of the tools are available for me never to actually ever do my expenses again. So that's fantastic. I want to enable these. I want to spend more time with my 3 kids, right? So if I can get away from expenses and spend that time with my 3 kids, it's a huge win. So we want to enable this type of Gen AI commerce. We want smarter agents. I want somebody to book my flights and hotels and all that kind of stuff for me, in addition to doing my expenses. But now comes a question of delegated authority from the carbon-based life form to the agent, and what responsibilities that agent actually has, and whether or not they're operating on behalf of the agent or on behalf of the carbon-based life form, and which one. When you think about KYC, which we always lived in the world of KYC, and you extend that into KYB, which is know your business. Businesses are really made up of humans at the end of the day. So when you do KYB, it's not that you just verify the taxpayer ID of a business. You have to verify who it is that actually owns the business, all the people that are making decisions for the business. Then, with the ABCs, of course, you come back from KYC to KYB to now KYA. So you have to know your agent. How do you know your agent? How do you know what that agent is actually representing and who they're acting on behalf, and what are the responsibilities of that agent on both sides of the transaction?
Super interesting. Nate, you mentioned something about these dummy websites, right? I mean, it feels like in theory we should be seeing a ton of that, right? Because of all these different code gen tools and things like that. Or is that something that that scammers are trying to manipulate right now, and people are getting taken advantage of it? And is this a real thing, or something sort of hypothetical or still theoretical?
So I can definitely speak to that on the business side.
Yeah, please.
I think we think about this in terms of, well, on the one side, there's the consumer aspect in terms of the dummy websites kind of tricking you into engaging these checkout flows that are not actually legitimate because it's not a legitimate merchant. But on the flip side, so much of how, just kind of latching onto the KYB piece, so much of how businesses are actually authenticated today are on the basis of various pieces of evidence that they're presenting, where shockingly, one of the pieces of evidence that fraud analysts actually rely on pretty heavily are just analyzing that business's website. And so this is actually this is actually a really important part of fraud analyst workflows today, and is also one of the biggest things we've seen exploited, where the cost to kind of generate a website that actually looks pretty legitimate, that uses good language, is quite trivial right now. So we've kind of seen a big advancement in how sophisticated some of these websites of these actually completely fake businesses have actually gotten. Now, I think kind of stepping back to what we were just talking about around, these attacks being committed at scale, and some of these purpose-built schools on committing fraud, one of the biggest, defenses we have on our side is the knowledge that this is happening at scale. And so very rarely are you actually running into a fraudster who is kind of doing this once and then getting ready to hang up their hats and retire. And so that's one of the big things is, we know that they're operating from these playbooks. And so because of that, one of the big things that we've actually started to see is yes, many of these websites look sophisticated and and will do really well when one person is looking at them on a one-off basis. But when you take a step back and actually look at many of these websites, you start to see that there's a lot of recycling. And so what we see is, in picking up on a more coordinated fraud ring, one of the common patterns we tend to see is the exact same website template has been used for all of them. And many of them might use the same stock images and AI-generated text and language. And so stepping back, that's actually the one solace we have is no matter what changes in the generative AI front, we know that they're always acting in repetition. And when there's repetition, there's a pattern. And as long as you are looking for the pattern, we have a little bit more on our side to work with.
Jay, I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of the stuff that you were talking about earlier about sort of the fact that we have to be human in order to actually do anything, right? And like around the identity authentication. You've been in this space for a while. You're the founder of Clear, so if you flew in, you've probably seen some of the Clear devices at an airport. How does identity and AI sort of work when you think about like the digital and physical world and the merging between the two?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can sort of address this proof of humanness is going to be a really interesting area. If you look at what Sam Altman sort of did is he created OpenAI, but then he also created a company called Tools for Humanity and enabled this whole ecosystem called WorldCoin. But it's really fundamentally premised on this idea that are you a human or are you an AI? And when you get down to that fundamental question, it becomes really what he's recognizing is that there's a significant challenge associated with that. With regards to this future of where we want to go, I think if everyone has a chance, definitely serve in a public service role. Like get to know what it's like on the government side, because you can't really talk about identity or self-identity without really thinking about the fundamental premise of government being the one that issues you a credential that says you are who you say you are. At the end of the day, if you don't get that credential, then you're not really the person that you are, which is kind of surprising to you. But I went down a path in 2003 working after 9/11 to be able to start the Department of Homeland Security. That led to the creation afterwards of Clear, because biometrics were actually a very consumer-friendly tool and much better way of being able to prove that you are who you say you are real time. Then I went back and served the Department of Defense for 3.5 years fighting against advanced persistent threat organizations and state-sponsored actors and people that were basically recruiting the best and brightest of their engineering talent within their country to attack American systems. It was very shocking. The first front of warfare is cybersecurity now. The second front of warfare is robotics. That's before you get planes in the sky, ships in the sea, and boots on the ground. So we really need to be able to solve this to be able to maintain the United States of America. God bless our public servants that have actually been working through the shutdown. I mean, it's just an incredible thing for me to just fly in, with air traffic controllers that are actually not getting paid, that could be at risk of missing their rent payments. But you look at that fundamental public-private nature of identity, that's just not here in the United States, but that's globally. The internet fundamentally missed out on the idea that they needed to create an identity layer to the internet. That's where all this comes from. So now how do you actually allow for a government-issued credential to now be portable online? And I started working in 2015, 2016 with Apple, with Google, with all the state DMVs to be able to put together a mobile driver's license ecosystem. I wrote portions of the Real ID Act back in 2004. We're trying, but it's taking a long time. And with private sector partnerships with public sector organizations, we can help to serve to accelerate all of those different initiatives.
I'm going to toss this to anyone, but what is the biggest hurdle around getting a sort of identity layer up and running? Is it the fact that there are a ton of stakeholders? Is it something even, more, deeper than that? Love to hear perspectives here.
Yeah, I can jump in since I kind of partially lost my hair building one and then exiting one and growing my hair back and then building a team at Proof. It's fragmentation, right? There are several different ways you can authenticate someone: biometric keys, other types of cryptographic keys, YubiKeys, your device, the list goes on and on. There's lots of different ways to say things or assert things about an identity digitally. Mobile driver's licenses are great for what they do. It's an ISO spec. It's really useful. But we have 50 states. That's its own set of fragmentation. States move at different speeds. They have different overhead, different technical
I
capabilities.
tried to create a national ID program, and I got shot down quickly by national
Exactly.
by privacy advocates.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
With an asterisk. Don't hold me to that. And then there's lots of other non-state-based ways of asserting trust about someone. In the EU, the entire digital ID and wallet movement in the EU is based off this format called a verifiable credential, which itself is a World Wide Web Consortium standard. It's another great way of allowing someone to package up stuff that's true about them, sign off on it, and then share it with permission. But it's one of many other ways of doing things. I think one of the really novel and really promising things that's happening in the quest to build the identity layer for the internet is that we're moving from a read-only way of verifying people, of I'm going to authenticate you, I'm going to verify some KYC, and I'm going to let you have an account or make a payment, to allowing different businesses or other parties in this network do read and write functions. You know, some of it has already, gone underway with the ability to say, grab identity data from like open banking connections. That's kind of like V1 of how this is starting to take form. You're now starting to see in Latin America, in the US, and parts of Europe, ways for businesses, banks, other major institutions to kind of create these verifiable little data bundles about the person in question and then durably associate them with that person. So, it may lead to a future where, we may get away from the like physical, like Costanza wallet that's about as like thick as it is tall, but we might have the digital equivalent where for a given interaction, a given payment, a given onboarding flow, I may need to opt into sharing specific things about myself. But I think the crux of solving for that is how do we continue to track and maintain the connection between the carbon-based life form and the digital thing that came from somewhere so that the next business or relying party that asks for it can still believe that it's true. And that's the hard part, given all of the fragmentation that's happening with the source material.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Oh,
Yeah, and just to hop in here, I saw this quite potently. I was investing in identity and fraud companies from a VC perspective, and they were super, super powerful, what we would call point solutions. And these are companies that were really narrowly focused on solving one part of fraud. And the reason that I joined MasterCard and my role at MasterCard is to really think about what does it look like when we bring all these things together. The problem is that every bank now has 10, 20, 30 different vendors to solve this identity and fraud problem. They don't do that well, and they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars annually to do so. The problem is we're basically putting blinders on. I have all these vendors. I have no single pane of glass from which I can really understand and contextualize a consumer or agent. And what we're working on at MasterCard is how do we bring all that together? How do I have the data to say, I know this consumer logged in or created an account over here, logged in over here, made a purchase over here, and a chargeback over here, and these are all linked. So the next time I see that Priya does 15 chargebacks, I know she's probably a friendly fraudster because nobody does that many. And I can maybe not give her an account the next time that she wants to sign up for Coinbase or a brokerage account. The problem is data sharing, though. When we get into it, all of the banks, all the brokerage firms, all of the delivery and gig apps would be better off if they share data with each other, because the same person who's attacking Wells Fargo is attacking Bank of America. The same person who's attacking Uber Eats is doing the same strategy on DoorDash, but they won't talk to each other. And so I think this also is to Jay's point of, is this a regulatory hurdle? Do we use the government to do this? I'm of the opinion that we need a third-party intermediary who collects all the data and then starts to say, okay, I have seen this bad actor across 15 different banks. I'm going to stop it here, but there's a lot of obstacles to do that. And once we solve it, if we solve it, then there'll be a lot less fraud.
No, I was just saying we will. No, I think that's exactly where I was going to hop in as well, because at the end of the day, when you look at the level of fragmentation and the lack of data sharing, what you're really seeing is a huge difficulty in aligning incentives. Namely, none of these big organizations are actually incentivized to share that data with one another. And this is a large part of why fraud consortiums have historically always had trouble taking off. I think on the other hand, in order to have that one, because this one big identity layer is the consistent problem on our minds as well. But the issue with that is, in order to have that one layer, you also need buy-in from every single party out there and every single network out there, that there is one network that can act as that system of record. And so I think to kind of bring that to a question, do we need the one layer? Do we need the layer of layers that all kind of interoperate and work together?
We're gonna need an orchestration layer for all the orchestration. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. This is, thank you. It's been really great to hear about, how identity is changing with this new tech around AI. And really appreciate you guys coming to the conference. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.